Let's see the air pollution. The air pollution in the atmosphere, it is mainly associated as a result of human activities. But there can be instances where the naturally produced air pollutants are also there. But it always outweighs the man-made pollution. And the man-made pollution, it usually concentrates in the urbanized areas where people live and work. So the problem of air pollution is not new. It is there from early centuries, and we can see in a book by Perkin in early 14th century there was a problem of smoke and odor in London, which is a consequence of coal burning, and it becomes such a public nuisance that several commissions were appointed to combat. And it has been seen in Perkins' book on the subject of air pollution. He quotes that the following declaration was made by King Edward I, and he says that, "Be it known to all within the sound of my voice, whosoever should be found guilty of burning coal shall suffer from the loss of his head." So from this we can understand that the problem was there from early centuries. So more recently, connections between air pollution and respiratory disease have been demonstrated, and determinal environmental effects on the global scale have been discerned. So several localized pollution episodes have resulted in documented deaths and highlighted the severity of the problem. Now let's see the major law that is enacted in relation to air pollution. The first major law enacted by the US Congress was in 1955, which is an Air Pollution Act, and this provided federal support for the research into this subject. And then came in 1963 the Clean Air Act of 1963, and this recognized the contribution of urbanization, industrial development, and increasing use of motor vehicle to be the problem, and encouraged the automobile manufacturers to address these problems. And 2 years later, in 1965, came the Motor Vehicle Air Pollution Control Act, which is provided for the establishment of vehicle emission standards. And it has opened the way to a series of amendments that led to the Air Quality Act of 1970, which provided the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So the Air Quality Act of 1970 provided the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, and this has resulted in the considerable reduction of vehicle emissions of several pollutants, and also gave the state to enact plans to conform these provisions. Then came in 1970 the Federal Aid Highway Act, which explicitly considered the highway planning that it must be inconsistent with the implementation plans to attain and maintain established regional air quality standards. And this resulted in an accelerated level of activity regarding the monitoring and modeling of the air quality impacts of transportation systems. And it has resulted in the integration of air quality consideration in the transportation planning process. And the 1990 amendments to the Clean Air Act imposed more stringent requirements on geographical areas. And if the areas are not complying these standards, these are put under the non-attainment areas. So these are the different laws enacted in relation to air pollution. These are the 1999 National Air Quality Standards. So we can see here there are two standard types coming. One is the primary standard, another one is the secondary standard. So under the primary standard, this is the one which is required to protect the public health. It also includes the physiological response of children, the elderly, and the people suffering from asthma and other respiratory diseases. So that comes under the primary standard. And under the secondary standards, these secondary standards are intended to protect the public welfare, including annoyance, loss of visibility, and damage to crops and livestock. So these are the two types of standards prescribed in 1999 National Air Quality Standards. And now let's see the various legislative background in India regarding this air pollution. India is the world's second largest country by population, that we all know. It has a rapidly growing economy, of which the transportation sector is a key component. The number of vehicles on Indian roads increases by about 240% over the past 10 years, and it's expected to expand at a similar rate throughout the next 2 decades. If we move on to the legislative background in India, The legal foundation for emissions, air quality, and fuel standards is based on several laws. The first one is the Essential Commodities Act, which came in 1955, which gives the state governments the right to ensure that all essential commodities, including petroleum products, are easily available to the public and meet government standards. It also calls for fines, imprisonment up to 1 year if somebody is trying to violate the act. Then one of the main establishment coming under that is the Central Pollution Control Board, CPCB, which was created in 1974 under the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act and was strengthened by the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981. So the CPCB, the Central Pollution Control Board, it spearheads the National Air Quality Program, which monitors and collects data on air quality in India and identifies the sources of pollution for the purpose of meeting air quality standards. Then comes the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981, which gives the SPCB, so State Pollution Control Board, the right to prohibit the production or burning of any fuel that is determined to lead to air pollution. And then came the Environmental Protection Act of 1986, which does not specifically mention fuels but does authorize the central and state government to regulate activities that can harm the environment, under which the burning of fossil fuels could be included. And in 1988 came the Motor Vehicle Act this established the vehicular emission standards and authorized the central government and state government to further regulate and enforce them. Then came the Petroleum and Natural Gas Rules of 2002, where a list of specific guidelines were given for the import, refinement of fuel in India, and it also deals with the transport of fuel within the country. The Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board 2006 created the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board and is responsible for ensuring fuel quality standards. Then another major one is the Environmental Impact Assessment 1994, 2006 and 2020. These were the various notifications of the Environmental Impact Assessment. So this was instrumental for studying the transportation project impacts, but it is a very time consuming process because of the large number of dependent and independent variables involved in it. The Indian vehicle rulemaking process stakeholders are discussed in this slide. So the limiting value for new vehicle emission standards or the vehicular emission standards is first proposed in a standing committee on implementation of emission legislation, which is also known as SCOE. So this committee, it composed of the representative from the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas Enterprises, the Society of Indian Automobile Manufacturers, SIAM, and also the various emission testing agencies are also included in this, like RAIC. So the significance of MORTH is that the Joint Secretary of the MORTH is the chairman of this standing committee on implementation of emission legislation. So the proposals made in this standing committee is then sent to another committee, which is known as the Central Motor Vehicle Rule Technical Standing Committee, for its finalization. So the rules comes into effect with the approval of these proposals sent by this standing committee on implementation of emission legislation. So the proposals that is sent from SCOE is finalized in the committee called Central Motor Vehicle Rule Technical Standing Committee. So rules come into effect with the approval of the proposal by the Secretary and the Minister of the MORTH. So this committee, the second committee, it also consists of the representative from the Bureau of Indian Standards, the Automotive Component Manufacturer Association of India, SIAM, and various other agencies as I discussed earlier. So this table, it illustrates the makeup of the two standing committees which decides on the motor vehicle emission standards. So the significance of MORTH is that the Joint Secretary of MORTH and the Minister, the Joint Secretary of MORTH is actually the chairman of these two committees, and these committees is actually putting the various provisions and also the various the rules and regulations regarding this Motor Vehicle Emission Act. So while the more set norms in use emission standards, individual states and municipalities are actually responsible for enforcing them. So the norms and the regulations for these emission standards are actually put forward by these two committees, where the Joint Secretary of MORTH is the chairman. Then these norms that is put forward by these committees are enforced by the individual states and municipalities, and it's a responsibility of these states and municipalities to enforce it. The combustion of transportation fuel releases several contaminants into the atmosphere. So let's see the problem dimension of that. So these contaminants include carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, oxides of nitrogen, lead, and other particulate matters. So how these hydrocarbons are created? Hydrocarbons of which more than 200 have been detected in exhaust emissions. So these are the result of incomplete combustion of fuel. And the particulates, they are minute solid or liquid particles that are suspended in the atmosphere. It includes aerosol, smoke, and dust particles. Photochemical smoke is a result of complex chemical reactions of oxides of nitrogen and hydrocarbons in the presence of sunlight. So once these are emitted into the atmosphere, the air pollutants undergo mixing or diffusion, and the degree of this mixing or diffusion, it depends upon many factors like the topographic factors, the climatic, the meteorological conditions, all influences the mixing and diffusion of these pollutants that is there in the atmosphere. So it also depends upon the wind speed and direction, the atmospheric stability. The assessment of air pollution or the assessment of air pollution effect of transportation, it can be undertaken at 3 levels. Okay, so the effect of transportation air pollution assessment, it can be done at 3 levels. One is at the microscopic level or micro scale level, another one is the mesoscale level, and third one is at the macro scale level. So let's first of all consider the micro scale level. So micro scale analysis we consider in the immediate vicinity of the transportation facility like highway. So in the near vicinity of a highway, what is the effect of these air pollutants? So that is at the micro scale analysis. Then mesoscale analysis, we consider the areas that are somewhat removed or away from the facility. So we will analyze the effect of these air pollutants on the areas which are away from the transportation facility. So that is regarding the mesoscale. Whereas at the macro scale, we consider the extent at the regional or global levels. Okay. So micro scale, I'll explain it once more. At the assessment of air pollution effects can be done at 3 levels. The transportation effect or the transportation air pollution effect can be considered at 3 levels. One is at the micro scale level, micro scale analysis in the immediate vicinity of a transportation facility. Mesoscale analysis is in the areas that are somewhat away from the facility, which includes the contribution of other mobile and stationary sources of pollution also. And the macro scale analysis, we consider this at an extended level, say to the regional or global level. The available air pollution estimation models range from simple models that provide rough estimate of emission levels to very complex numerical models that could trace the diffusion of pollutants in space and time and also simulate the chemical processes that follow. So these are the very dimensions or problem dimensions of air pollutant effect of transportation systems.